what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about how to take your saw down to the point where you're going to replace and reinstall arbor covers. Now, I've removed some stuff here because it's kind of boring to watch me take it apart, but it's fairly simple. There's 2 screws that hold the catch tray on here. You take those out, and then on the arbor cover, and this is on the HP saws that are square rail, there's 4 screws here, and some people miss it, but there's 2 screws in the backside right here. Now, when you take these screws out, some people will sit there and go through all the trouble of taking these out, but it's not necessary. The arbor cover can slide off, and then you lift the back end up, and you walk it off, and you can leave this all assembled. Now, if your felt is really old and bad, just replace the felt. It's really cheap. It keeps you from getting a bunch of oil and stuff into this housing with your bearings. Now, the other thing that we did that I really like, because I get tired of messing with felt, is I made this arbor cover with a thicker base here. I did an O-ring groove, so now that O-ring seals against this housing and prevents any oil from getting out. Before, we were using the felt gasket, and then you had to put ultra black on it to keep it from leaking there, because the oil will get down the shaft, then come out, and then run down the side of your saw. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take these out and remove the arbor assembly. Now, what I like to do, if I got a saw that's aligned and I just have a bad bearing, and I'm going to replace that bearing or both bearings and then put it back together, that I'm going to start by loosening these set screws in the front. Now, I don't loosen the ones in the back. And the reason I don't do that is because if I leave them be, I'm going to be really close to my alignment when I go to drop it back in. Now, I'm going to tell you how to get it in quickly, because a lot of people mess with this and do this. Now, the other thing you're going to see, if you got an old machine, you wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. And I know, because I had a lot of the old machines and I hated them, because you would have to stick your hand underneath here and hold your hand on a nut, on a wrench, and take it loose on the top. And that pretty much kind of sucks, because your arm is kind of sharp stuff underneath there, and your arm gets all mucky and all to hold a nut, because they were a little cheap on the arbor plate, and they put a thinner arbor plate and didn't even weld the nut on the bottom, which they could have done as well. I put a thicker arbor plate in it, and I tap the plate so you can service everything from the top. So I'm going to take all these bolts out. Now, the other thing you're going to see is, if you have a saw, if you have one of the, and I'm going to call it that, inferior saws that does not have the adjustments here, then the alignment process, when you get into it, you'll see how it's going to be more difficult. So now I got my arbor out and clean off my arbor plate. And, like normally in a saw, you're going to be covered with muck, and then you're going to take these set screws loose, and you're going to get the arbor shaft out and put your new bearings on. And I'm not going to do that here, obviously. So I'm going to start by positioning the bearings as close as I can on the shaft, putting the shaft assembly back in. And what I'm going to pay attention to first, and I am going to do this because I'm going to show you from scratch how, I'm going to move all the set screws. I'm going to show you from scratch how to do this and not have it take forever, because it should be an easy job if you know the right way, and if you can watch somebody who knows how to do it, then you won't waste a lot of time when you're going to put it back together. And I got one bolt that is giving me a little trouble. There it is. So I get my bolts in, and the first thing I do is I'm going to look at getting this arbor shaft in the center. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about why the alignment's important So what I do is I'm moving the shaft till I look, and the gap here and the gap here is the same. Now what I want to do is, the first thing I want to do is I actually want to lock this bearing down. Now these bearings are self-aligning, so you can tighten this back bearing here because you don't want it to move, because you want it to be in the middle of this hole. Now, once I have that, then I also want to put the set screws in. Now I'm going to show you something in a little bit about the power of these set screws, and it's also why we put big welds on these things. If anybody looks at one of the old HP saws, you'll see little tiny nuts welded on the thing, and half the time the nut gets broken off, and I freaking hate that. So I put bars on these things, so when I go to put it together, it's not going to break a nut off or something.